Farlight 84 is going through a huge identity crisis. Like, if I asked you right now to tell me what the game's about, well, that answer kind of depends on when exactly you started playing, because yes, it is a battle royale, but if you're like me and you played during its 40,000 concurrent peak back in 2023, you'd probably tell me that it was a fast-paced movement hero shooter with a pretty addictive jetpack mechanic and a bunch of fun vehicles. But if you started playing over here specifically after the update that most of the community considered killed Farlight, then maybe you can call it a slow and sluggish clone of Apex Legends, and well, if you just got into the game recently, then it's a completely different situation, where apparently it's a creature capturing kawaii battle royale now. Like, I've never seen a game do so many hard shifts on what exactly it's trying to be in such a short amount of time, all while neglecting the core audience that made it so successful in the first place. Like, if you check the threads on Reddit and the reviews on Steam, it's just filled with people in a state of shock wondering what exactly happened to Farlight 84. And maybe in trying to expand their reach and appeal to as many people as possible, they just ended up pissing everybody off to the point where even on mobile platforms, which is supposed to be the game's strong point, the reviews have dropped all the way down to 3.2 out of 5, which is just disastrous. Now, the current state of Farlight 84 is obviously full of downsides. I played it on stream recently to figure out what exactly changed, and while it did feel like a completely different game, well, there are some positives I do want to talk about, but this is the most clear-cut example of a studio that broke into the saturated battle royale market with a winning formula, had the perfect launch window to take over the mobile side of the industry, and then just decided to throw it all away. Now, when it comes to live service games, it's pretty typical to see them burst into the scene like how Farlight 84 did. I think it's almost like a rite of passage that every single live service needs to be the brand new flavor of the week that every streamer's playing before they all move on to the next new thing. But unlike most live service games, Farlight actually did manage to have some staying power. Like, if you compare their Steam chart to other battle royales, well, while everyone else had a massive spike that almost immediately dropped off, Farlight 84 was actually having this sort of like graceful decline that you would expect from a successful live service. That meant that the game resonated with enough players and there was potential to keep evolving it over time, and you know, I could totally see why. Farlight was basically a mix between the gritty post-apocalyptic vibes that you would get from a game like Apex Legends, for example, while also having a character roster that felt like they could just be meme skins from Fortnite, so the game definitely had a lot of charm to it. Farlight also had the biggest opportunity window to dominate the mobile games market since it launched just 1 month before Apex Legends Mobile was scheduled to be shut down. And with everybody calling Farlight the weird love child between Apex and Fortnite, well, honestly, the stars couldn't align more for the game. It was a hero shooter with pretty unique characters that, yes, it did take a lot of inspiration from Apex in terms of like the aesthetics, the weapon customization, but it was actually unique enough to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. The art style was pretty cool, the vehicle variety was fun, that was one of my favorite parts about the game, and the gunfights were awesome because the character abilities just paired up so well with the jetpack mechanics, so Farlight had actually a lot of options on how to take on a fight. And speaking of the jetpacks in the game, probably the most talked about feature in Farlight 84, well, the way that they worked is that they gave you a horizontal dash and a vertical dash, so the burst in mobility helped you cover distance pretty quickly, or reposition yourself if you got caught out in the open. The feature was super satisfying to use, and Farlight 84, in every sense of the word, was considered a movement-based shooter game. And that's why so many people to this day still talk so much about the jetpack mechanic, but the Farlight team, instead of trying to keep going in that direction and give the players more of what they enjoyed, they actually went the opposite. You know, they went in a completely different tangent when they dropped Update 2.0, where Farlight 84 went from being a standout battle royale to a soulless, generic-looking Apex clone. So with Update 2.0, not only did they decide to unexpectedly remove the most defining feature that the game had, but they also just completely changed a lot of the core mechanics of the game. Like, they reworked almost all the character abilities, they removed passive skills outright, they made the main game mode be trios instead of squads, nerfed vehicles to the ground, and just remade a lot of the character models on top of updating the graphics, probably trying to chase that wider audience with their new direction. But what really ended up happening is that now Farlight 84 just felt like a rip-off game. It had nothing really to differentiate itself from the rest of the battle royale games that are out there. This one update was a huge point of contention with the community, and it's the main reason why so many people just decided to quit the game on the spot. And it's literally because of the jetpack removal, because every other change that happened was tolerable. You know, people could manage it, but by making the game slower and more sluggish, that was really just like the breaking point for a lot of the players. And from the developer's perspective, I kind of get it, you know, having a universal feature that gives you such a fast burst in mobility in a fight, it just makes it harder for you to innovate and, you know, introduce new mechanics and abilities that work around the jetpacks, and having to balance all of that, I can assume it's a nightmare situation too. But at the same time, the reality is that if the fast gameplay was the reason people kept showing up, then you couldn't really just take it away from people and just expect the players to be okay with it, you know? And Farlight, yes, they did try introducing a sliding mechanic to replace the jetpacks afterwards, but that just ended up making it seem even more like Apex. If If there's one trend that I'm noticing with the Farlight team, and the reason why I think they're going through such a huge identity crisis, it's that they're very trigger happy when it comes to changing the core gameplay elements of Farlight 84. Also, they just seem to just do whatever they want, and it doesn't seem like they take the player's thoughts into consideration, which is kind of important, you know, since they're the ones playing your game and keeping it afloat by supporting it. I remember reading somewhere that the developers at Farlight just get bored with their work too easily, and that's why they keep doing all these major changes all the time. And honestly, I'm kind of starting to believe that. Because after the jetpack fiasco, people probably thought that was going to be it, right? Like, okay, yeah, you did the major change, awesome. I guess we're an Apex Legends knockoff now, with a lot less players than before, but heck, at least we know what to expect from the game. But no, they decided to pivot once again when they dropped their brand new biggest update back in September that introduced buddies into the Farlight universe. So halfway through the game's lifespan, they decided to rebrand themselves again as being the world's first pet capture battle royale, which is fine and dandy if you're trying to find a new audience, right? But the problem is that you already had an audience, and you already made your big impact on the market, and the general population kind of already knows Farlight because of what it used to be, not what it is now. So the buddies are basically pets that are scattered all throughout the area that you can capture using these Pokeballs. You can call them buddy orbs as much as you want, they're still Pokeballs at the end of the day. And while the buddies that you capture have different abilities, going from something simple like tossing them like a grenade, all the way to being able to change the direction in which the ring is closing on. So when I first heard about this on the live stream, it actually sounded like an awesome idea, you know, I will give them that. Adding Pokemons to a battle royale is definitely attention grabbing. But then I actually got the chance to see it firsthand when I was playing on stream, and unfortunately, well, the way that they implemented the whole buddy system was just super underwhelming, which, you know, sucks because on their Steam store page, it's literally what they have written on the description. So let me just explain how the whole buddy system works in Farlight 84. You start off every single match with one Pokeball, and you can find more of them as you loot throughout the game. The buddies in the map sadly don't do absolutely anything in the wild other than just like exist in a corner waiting to be caught. They always have a 100% guaranteed capture rate, so it's not like Pal World, for example, where there's stakes involved since you have to fight them and weaken the pals before you can capture them. No, the buddies are basically just like extra items in the game that you need a limited resource to be able to loot, and that is it. They're just an item waiting to be captured instead of being like living, breathing creatures that add an extra challenge to the game, which really is a bad implementation of an otherwise great idea. Like, imagine you were in Pal World, but it's also a battle royale. You know, I think at that point I would probably move on from the whole jetpack conversation real quick, but unfortunately that's just not the case here. I will say though that as someone who played Farlight back when they had jetpacks, I also played it directly after they took the jetpacks away, and now coming back to see the current state of the game, I did try to go into it with an open mind to see what I could find that's positive about it. Like, for example, if you've never heard of Farlight 84 and you decided to check it out as a fun little casual battle royale, I think you would actually enjoy it because the game in its current state is pretty well built. Like, the character designs look great. I know that they've reworked the crap out of them. Like, Bo, for example, had a complete change to make him look hot now. Nightwatch is literally a different person. Momoy looks like she went to a K-pop concert, and while the rest of the cast got updated in one way or another. Luckily, my main duck side still looks like a duck, so there's not much change there, but I went from liking his playstyle in the past to just not really resonating with how his kit works now. So I spent a lot of the time playing Maggie, and I think that if you miss the old Farlight, the best thing you can do is just use Maggie since they made the jetpack mobility her entire kit. But unfortunately, it'll just feel like you're playing a hero shooter where everyone else has very creative and unique abilities, meanwhile you just have the jetpack and that's it. I can't really say much about the weapon balancing and compare the before and afters because I honestly just can't remember how they used to feel, but one thing I did notice is that the time to kill in Farlight 84 was just ridiculously low. Like, it doesn't matter what tier of armor you're carrying, it just felt like anybody could down you almost instantly. And without having any burst movement options, well, it just felt like if you were caught by surprise, you're basically dead. You know, and it's not something I was honestly a fan of, but also wasn't a deal breaker either. The looting mechanic in Farlight is still kind of annoying. Like, I get why you need to have auto looting since it helps people who are playing on mobile, and while it does make it convenient to loot since there's so many different items and attachments to keep track of, it just feels counterintuitive sometimes. Like, for example, if I want to armor swap, or if there's a scope I want to put on a specific weapon, then I have to see where the hell it went. And while the buddy system, like I mentioned, was also kind of underwhelming, I felt like I could just ignore them entirely and not have it affect my gameplay in any way, shape, or form. So for a game that's calling itself the first pet capture battle royale, well, the pet capturing mechanic still doesn't feel like the main core aspect of the game. It just feels like a fun little side project. project. I suppose they were useful once you had them, but it really just leaves you wishing that there was more to them other than just like existing there. It's just really sucky to put that feature in the front and center of Farlight's marketing while also still having the entire system just feel so bland. And while the current state of Farlight 84, if you just happen to stumble into it, you've never heard of it before, I think you can have decent fun in it. And while with the brand new season that's coming in, they're also going to bring back jetpacks temporarily. The new hero also looks pretty interesting, so it's kind of like we have to wait and see how they can even further improve the current state of the game. But unfortunately, there's just a huge chunk of players who outright just refuse to play the game because every time the developers decide to add something new, like for example adding Pokemons to Farlight 84, they're just thinking like Farlight will literally add pets into a game before bringing back jetpacks. And I know that Farlight 84 is a mobile-centric kind of video game, but if we take the decline on the Steam charts and assume that's also happening on the mobile side of things because of the drop in reviews, well, we can sort of assume that Farlight 84 might not be doing too hot these days. And you know, it sucks because imagine that you're a breakout success in the already saturated battle royale genre, and then you throw out your biggest update ever where you completely revamp and rework a lot of the game's core features to focus on pleasing the players, but instead of seeing a spike in numbers, all you get is a huge drop in players. Unfortunately, that just continues to be the case for Farlight 84, which kind of sucks because when you compare the before and after, there's definitely been a lot of improvement in terms of like the character, the behaviors, the models, the environment, you know, maybe not in the movement, which is the really core important part of the game, but you can tell that the developers have been trying to innovate, and you have to respect that, but at the same time, you can't really expect people to be receptive of that because you're literally doing everything except giving the players what they really want. Farlight 84 is a game that doesn't really know what it wants to be, and it just keeps changing up too many core elements of the game for the players to actually be able to form a connection with it, which is a huge problem when it comes to live service games, you know, because Fortnite, for example, for as many changes and wild seasons that they introduce, it still feels like Fortnite at the end of the day. The same thing with Apex Legends and, you know, Call of Duty Warzone, it still feels like it's that game at its core. Meanwhile, Farlight 84 has so many different wild changes that every time I've logged in, it's just felt like a completely different experience. So what's going to happen with the game in the future? I don't really know. It's not really doing too hot right now, but with the new season coming up and the new additions that they're going to introduce, who knows? Maybe the future will prove me wrong. Maybe the player base will skyrocket. It's something that we'll just have to wait and see. But anyways, that's all I really want to talk about with you guys, so thank you guys for watching.